Thank you for participating in today's webinar. And now for our featured speaker.
My name is Chris Middleton, Food Program Manager in North America for Bureau Veritas, and later you will be hearing from Jessica Burke, Senior Technical Manager with BRCGS. Bureau Veritas is a global leader in testing, inspection, and certification. With over $5 billion in revenue and over 75,000 employees globally, we have many clients that spread across the food industry in our 8 global business lines. Food currently falls primarily into certification and commodities. Our mission is at the heart of key challenges: quality, health and safety, environmental protection, and social responsibility. Through our wide range of expertise, impartiality, and independence, we foster confidence between companies, public authorities, and our clients. So, to start off on our webinar, let's discuss what exactly we're going to be talking about with this blended audit approach. You'll start seeing the terminology of ICT brought up a lot, which means information communication technologies. You will sometimes hear the term remote technologies used as well. This can be any sort of software or hardware that could allow you to gather information that can be used to determine conformance with audit criteria during an audit. Examples that can be used could be anything from smartphones and iPads, wearable technology that is sometimes known as Google Glass as an option, or even tablets out there. Examples of software are not limited to, but can include Microsoft Teams, GoToMeeting, or Zoom. If you want more information, you can always go to iaf.com and download a copy of the mandatory document for the use of information communication technology for auditing assessment purposes. It's free for anybody to go to the site and download. Although around for some time, the use of these technologies was really brought to the forefront due to the COVID pandemic. Something really needed to be done to account for all of the certificates that would be expiring within the food certification world and even outside of the food certification world. Thoughts had to be gathered to ensure to allow for an efficient and effective audit process to account for those travel restrictions or even auditor availability issues that were going to be occurring because of the restrictions that were in place. The one thing that is going to allow with this thought process of moving to the blended audit approach and the use of ICT is to allow for a more focused audit during the time on site, which could be thought of as more of a risk-based approach at what needs to be evaluated, and allow for more efficient time for all of those personnel that are involved within the audit process. So this really sounds good and all, but really what did GFSI ultimately have to say about the use of information communication technology? What they set forth was that subversion of the benchmarking requirements that was described in one of the bullet points on a previous slide. On this slide, you'll see that it talks about some of the key bullets within there that are going to have to be captured in order for the CPO to meet the requirements for GFSI benchmarking. An agreement really has to be in place between you as the site and the CB to use the technologies. That cannot be forced upon you by the CB or vice versa. The ability of the site and the CB, which includes the auditor, because many CBs do use subcontractors to effectively use remote technologies, must be determined. So you have to be able to demonstrate that you can effectively use the technologies to determine conformance with the audit standards. The time frame between those audit activities was really defined. This is a bit of a head-scratching point for many people, but it was defined by GFSI that it cannot be more than 30 days. The only exception here is if there are extenuating circumstances that could potentially be extended to 90 days. So remember that it's not 90 days as the initial planning, but it has to be within 30 days for GFSI. Again, this is for GFSI, but it could possibly be extended to 90 days in the event something comes up within the planned time frame that would prevent the on-site portion from being conducted. The on-site portions must include physical inspection of the facility. It cannot be an auditor that just shows up on site and sits in the conference room. This will have to be a demonstration of GMPs that are implemented, so you will have to be in operation at the time of this on-site visit, and there needs to be a verification check of the implemented food safety management system and HACCP/food safety plans that have been done. There needs to be an evaluation of that. It cannot be solely done by records or remote on that side of things. You can use information communication technologies or remote activities to evaluate the handling of corrective actions. Some of us have been doing that for a bit. That was clarified by the GFSI. Information communication technologies cannot be used as the sole manner for witnessing a new auditor. That is for a new auditor. You cannot do that remotely. That really is more of something for the certification body world than it is for the sites that are being audited. It can be used, though, for ongoing auditor behavior assessment. So as a site, you may be requested to have information communication technologies used to evaluate the performance of the auditor that is auditing you. So you may not actually have a second person sitting there from a certification body that is witnessing the auditor. They may be using those information communication technologies, which was permitted by the GFSI now. And really the only type that is allowed to use full remote / only information communication technologies is the brokers group. So F2 within the GFSI requirements. So remember, the only group that can have a full remote audit is brokers. Very key to remember. Very, very, very key to remember, because that does get misinterpreted at points. So this is well and good as well, but what did GFSI leave open to interpretation for the CPOs? What they did not account for is what the total duration of an ICT assessment has to be. They did account for how much time has to be on site, and that'll be described shortly, but they did not account for the total duration of the ICT assessment. Also, they did not account for how the activities have to be documented. They need to be documented, but they didn't indicate exactly how they have to be used. The last thing that they did not account for is how that use of those technologies is going to be communicated either on an audit report, a certificate, or other sorts of CPO documentation, either be it directories or websites. So those are the key things that were not directed at all. So seeing that those are the requirements that GFSI had out there, and we described a little bit as to what information communication technology is, why don't we have BRCGS describe exactly where they come from? So Jessica Burke, the Senior Technical Manager with the Americas, is going to take over. Jess, the floor is yours.
And thank you all for joining us today. Before I go into our blended audit protocol and what it means to us, I'd like to start by just giving a quick introduction of BRCGS. We provide the most rigorous and respected GFSI benchmark programs covering food safety, quality, and regulatory compliance. We also provide similar programs to support logistics, manufacture of packaging, brokers, retailers, and specialty claim verification like gluten-free and plant-based. We ensure consistency through our world-class compliance program, and we provide essential information, systems, and opportunities for individuals to grow and improve their capabilities through things like Participate, Professional, and e-learning. So Chris provided a really thorough overview of GFSI's position on ICT, and based on this, we at BRCGS have developed our own blended audit approach. As the name suggests, a blended audit is the combination of a remote audit and an on-site audit, where the remote portion takes place first, followed by the on-site within 28 days. The remote portion uses ICT, which Chris did a great job of covering earlier. Blended audits are not mandatory, but they do provide another option that can be considered by the certification bodies and sites. It's important to note, as Chris mentioned earlier as well, that the blended audit approach must be agreed on by both the CB and the site. So it can't be forced on you. It has to be something that's agreed on. The option is only available for the announced audit program and is applicable to the food, packaging, storage and distribution, agents and brokers, and consumer product standards. I should also mention that it's only applicable for recertification audits. So if it's the site's first BRCGS audit, they must have a full on-site audit. However, they can choose a blended audit every year after that. Before confirming if a blended audit is suitable, the certification body will be performing a risk assessment to ensure that the audit objectives can be achieved using this approach. As part of the risk assessment, consideration will need to be given to historical performance of the site, including any risks identified from complaints and recalls. Documentation and records must be available in electronic form, and the site must be willing to share these remotely. That's really important. The CB also needs to ensure availability of appropriate auditors and technical experts to be able to conduct the remote audit. Obviously, IT is also a big consideration. The CB and site must both be able to access and use an appropriate IT system, and the site staff must be capable of using the technologies, such as on-site video, for example. Once the CB has performed the risk assessment and confirmed that the blended audit approach is appropriate, the audit planning can begin. So to prepare for the use of ICT, all certification, legal, and customer requirements related to confidentiality, security, and data protection, or CSDP for short, must be identified and actions taken to ensure their effective implementation. So this means that both the auditor and the auditee agree with the use of ICT and with the measures taken to meet the requirements. Evidence of the agreements must be kept and may be in basically any form. So it could be the form of records, agreed procedures, or emails. The importance really is in having these CSDP criteria acknowledged by all participants. In terms of information sharing, it's likely that the auditor will need access to information in advance to prepare for the audit. And it's best if this is done using a secure and agreed system such as cloud-based, VPN, or other appropriate file sharing systems. And then once the audit's complete, the auditor will delete or remove access to any documented information and records that are not required to be retained as objective evidence. And as far as screenshots go, any screenshots of documents or records must be authorized by the site in advance, and auditors must not take screenshots of auditees as evidence. Planning of the blended audit will be critical to ensuring things run smoothly. Prior to the audit, the CB will share the audit plan with the site, which will indicate which documents will be needed remotely. So you'll have that in advance. The CB will set up the technical requirements for the remote audit, which will include confirming a stable internet connection or access, choosing an appropriate platform that works for both the CB and the site, such as GoToMeeting, Skype, Zoom, or otherwise, and confirming the availability of hardware such as webcams, mics, and cameras where necessary. We highly recommend that the CB and the site test the ICT platform that will be used prior to the remote audit to ensure that everything is working as expected. This will obviously prevent any delays on the actual day of the audit. And as I alluded to earlier, the on-site audit must take place within 28 days of the remote audit. However, we do recommend that the remote and on-site audits take place as close together as possible. In exceptional circumstances and following GFSI's guidance, it may be possible to allow 90 days between the remote and on-site audits. However, the circumstances must be justifiable and the request needs to be approved by BRCGS. I think it goes without saying that the remote audit should be facilitated in quiet environments wherever possible to avoid background noises and interference. So the use of noise canceling technology, such as mufflers on microphones or headsets, might be something to consider as well. And in the event that technology fails during the remote audit, the CB and the site can reschedule, providing it occurs within the 28-day window. I should mention, however, that if the issue is a site issue, the site may be liable to pay for the lost audit day. So in terms of audit duration, the total audit duration does not change compared to a full on-site audit and is the same as specified in the applicable standard. The total duration is the combination of the time spent on-site auditing and remote auditing, but it doesn't, however, include audit planning, the risk assessment, or report writing. The remote audit duration must not exceed a maximum of 50% of the total audit duration. The actual duration of the remote audit will be dependent on the CB assessment and may be significantly less than the maximum in some circumstances. So just as an example, if additional risks are identified, specific documents are not available for the remote audit, or the CB identifies clauses that actually need to be audited on site, even when they relate to documents or records, that could change that 50%. If the standard allows for a separate audit of the head office, the blended audit protocol can be used and should follow the color coding of the relevant clauses of the standard. In some situations, this may mean that the auditor doesn't need to visit the head office if all clauses are appropriate for remote audits. If some of the audits, or some of the clauses rather, that are applicable to the head office require on-site and others may be remote, the site has the choice. They can choose to have a blended audit at the head office, a fully on-site office audit, or a remote head office audit with the remaining on-site elements being assessed at each of the site audits. So to give you an overview of what elements might be covered in each portion of the audit, I want to refer to the color coding of the requirements. The requirements of most of the BRCGS standards are color-coded to show the activities that would usually be audited as part of the assessment of the production areas and facilities versus those that form the audit of records, systems, and documentation. The color coding can also be used to identify which could be audited during on-site and which may be completed by remote audit. So for example, in the food standard, the audit activities related to the orange clauses are audit of production facilities and GMPs. These clauses would need to be included in the on-site portion of the blended audit, while the green clauses would require auditing of records, systems, and documentation, and therefore it would make sense that remote would be permitted for those clauses. Where clauses are dual colored, they need to be included in both the remote audit and practical application confirmed in the on-site audit. There are some specific requirements around blended audits for each of the standards and additional modules, and I will cover these in more detail a little bit later in the presentation. So as I mentioned earlier, the remote audit must be conducted first and must be planned in a way that the site has enough time for nonconformity closure and the certification decision to be made within 42 days of the on-site audit. So this means that a remote audit may take place within the 56 days prior to the audit due date. The remote audit may include a live video check of the manufacturing process, fabrication, and hygiene of the site if required. And if this is the case, the video will not be recorded. However, a record will be kept of the duration of the video and what was covered, which will be included in the audit report. And another important thing to mention is that if a critical nonconformity or the number and level of nonconformities identified during the remote audit would result in a failure, the existing certificate will be withdrawn immediately and a new fully on-site audit would need to be completed. The structure of the remote audit will be similar to that used for on-site audits. So there will be an opening meeting to confirm the scope and processes of the remote audit. That will be followed by a document review. There will be an interview or discussion with personnel, for example, to discuss the document being reviewed, policy, or record being audited. Final review of the findings by the auditor and preparation for the closing meeting will then take place. And then, of course, the closing meeting to review any of the remote audit findings with the site and to confirm any nonconformities. So just again, the on-site audit must be conducted within 28 days or less of the remote audit and during the audit due window of the current certificate. As you might expect, the on-site audit will include physical verification of good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, the traceability challenge, and implementation of the product safety management system. So for the food standard, this includes HACCP activities such as the effective implementation of prerequisite programs, physical verification of the process flow diagram, and CCP monitoring and verification. And for the packaging materials and consumer product standards, it includes hazard analysis and risk assessment activities, verification of the process flow diagram, and where relevant, CCP monitoring and verification. Similar to the remote audit, again, the on-site audit consists of all the regular stages. As always, there will be an opening meeting to confirm the scope and process of the audit. There'll be a production facility inspection to review the practical implementation of the systems, which will include things like observing product changeover procedures and interviewing personnel. Any requirements that were identified during the risk assessment by the CB as needing to be completed will also be assessed. And there will be a review of any other documentation needed to complete the audit trail. So this might include things like the results of the traceability test, pest control records, etc. And lastly, there will be a final review of findings by the auditor and preparation for the closing meeting. Any nonconformities that are identified during the remote and on-site audit will follow the existing requirements of the standard. As always, evidence of the action taken to correct nonconformities identified at the remote and on-site audits will need to be submitted to the CB within 28 days of the on-site. Verification of the preventive action plan and the implementation of the corrective actions may be through further on-site assessment, or as Chris alluded to earlier, the examination of submitted evidence through ICT. The grade awarded will be based on the total number of nonconformities identified between both the on-site and remote audit, and according to the announced audit protocol in the standard. If nonconformities are identified during the remote audit and are closed out and corrected before the on-site audit, they will still be included in the grade calculation. That has been a question that we've had quite a few times. The design and information on the certificate are the same as for all of the audits, all audits in the standard, except the certificate will actually state on it blended announced. And the dates of both audits will be included on the certificate. The audit report will clearly identify the extent to which any ICT has been used in carrying out the audit and the effectiveness of ICT in achieving the audit objectives. It will include all summarized information and findings of both the remote and on-site audit, resulting in one single audit report. So it won't be two separate, one for remote, one for on-site. It'll be one single report. It will reference the dates and the duration of the on-site and remote audits, and will include records of the people having attended the remote audit and the on-site audit, and an asterisk will be used to denote the information related to the requirements assessed during the remote portion. So I did promise to come back to the standard specific requirements, so I'll just take a few minutes to go through that now. As I mentioned earlier, the food standard permits blended audits using the color coding of the requirements, and this is the same for START intermediate level. However, the option is not available for START basic level. There are also a number of voluntary modules related to the food standard. So module 10, which is global gap, must be completed on site, so there's no remote option for that. Module 11, meat supply chain assurance. Remote audit is permitted. However, any traceability test that's completed by the auditor as part of the audit should be initiated at the on-site audit. Module 12, which is the AOACS gluten-free foods module, must be completed on-site only, so no remote option. And module 13, the FSMA preparedness remote audit is permitted for that module. For BRCGS agents and brokers standard, the initial audit must be fully on-site. However, subsequent audits can be completed as a full remote audit where no on-site audit is required. This, of course, needs to be supported by the CB's risk assessment. Where the agent or broker has multiple offices that are included in the audit scope, the CB will need to complete an additional assessment for each office to ensure that the remote option is possible and can be suitably scheduled. It's also recommended that a representative from the head office of the company is available and participates in the audit of the additional offices where that's possible. The agents and brokers FSMA preparedness module may be completed remotely. And similar to the food standard, the requirements in the packaging standard are also color-coded to show how the site's activities can be verified. Activities that form part of the physical on-site audit are colored orange, while the activities that can be audited remotely are colored blue. Module 10 for plastic pellet loss prevention must be completed on-site only. And for storage and distribution, the blended audit is permitted, again, using the color coding within the standard. So consumer products is slightly more complicated. The consumer product standards use color coding as well, but to differentiate foundation and higher level certification levels. However, as in the other standards, the requirements are set out in the same way. So it's possible to identify sections and clauses in the standard relevant to an on-site audit of production facilities and GMPs. So this would include site standards or Section 4, product inspection and testing or Section 5, and process control, which is Section 6. Those where a remote audit would be permitted for audit of records, systems, and documentation include product risk management or Section 2, product safety and quality management, which is Section 3, and process risk assessment, which is Clause 611. Clauses requiring both on-site and remote verification include control and acceptance of incoming raw materials, components and packaging materials, which is Clause 352, traceability challenge, and training and competency of personnel. Unfortunately, as far as the ethical risk assessment goes, that can't be completed remotely and must be done fully on site. So I hope that provided a bit more insight into the blended audit protocol from our point of view. And now I'm just going to hand it back to Chris to give you some more practical advice on how to apply the approach.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jess. Now that everybody on this webinar we're all experts in what ICT is and exactly what the BRCGS requirements are, why don't we review some of the benefits of using the blended audit approach and really look to see if that's really the right solution for our facilities or our sites. So one of these things that we can really look at, the nice part of it is having almost like an out of sight, out of mind sort of idea with many of the employees at the site, with less auditor time being on site. Sometimes that people get really, really nervous and concerned when an auditor is in the building. Maybe that tension and that nervousness will sort of lessen if that auditor is not on site and some of those activities are done ahead of time before they arrive on site. The other option that makes this beneficial is it does allow for a much more efficient use of time when you are on the floor at the facility. You're really out seeing the action as to what's going on when the auditor is there, and can allow for a risk-based approach based off of the observations that were made using ICT earlier within that process. The other item that really this will benefit are some of those really long audits that occur. It'll help break the audit up a bit and allow for people to complete their work and not just walk around with the auditor for 4 to 5 days. So that will definitely help out those larger facilities in certain areas. And the last item that it does, it really allows us to get with the times. Auditing was really kind of behind on looking at using technology and moving it forward. This does allow us to allow for effective sharing of electronic documents, which are sometimes a challenge during on-site audits of reviewing that, and may allow for a bit more of an efficient process between the auditor and the site to look at that information. Now that we've seen what those potential benefits are and if it's good for you, why don't we kind of do a quick recap and see what the blended audits are not. We did talk about that earlier. These are not replacements for an on-site assessment in the complete process. The only time that this is allowed to be done completely remotely is for the agents and brokers groups with BRCGS. This does not reduce your total audit duration. So this is not going to make you have a shorter audit overall. This will decrease the amount of time an auditor is physically in the facility. However, it does not reduce the amount of time in which the auditor will be spent evaluating you. This next point is extremely key to understand. This is not going to be an easier audit. So I will repeat, this is not going to be an easier audit. All of the requirements are going to have to be evaluated within your BRCGS audit. You are going to have to be able to demonstrate conformance to everything. This is not going to be, well, the auditor isn't on site, so he's not going to be able to see that, so he won't have to review it. That is not the case. Everything is going to have to be audited, and you will have to demonstrate effective conformance on that side of things. And lastly, this is something that gets brought up a lot and really is confused. A lot of people think that this blended audit approach and the use of remote technologies is just a solution for the COVID pandemic. It is not. This is baked into the cake. This is not the frosting that can be wiped off. It is there forever. Once COVID is gone, and hopefully that is sooner rather than later, this will still be allowed for future audits in the years to come. So this is not something that is just for COVID. It will be here forever. So seeing that, how can we really maximize the time and the process? What are some of the tips and tricks that we can follow on this side of things? So make sure, first and foremost, you select an appropriate technology. That's extremely important on that side of things. Make sure that they function as you intend. There are situations at times, and I have had this experience, that maybe certain databases don't share properly on technologies, and you can't see certain screens sometimes. So make sure that the technologies that are selected are appropriate for everything that is going to be used and is going to be shared. Ensure that you know where everything is. There's many times we have shared folders, or we have certain files in different software systems, and we know that it's in there. We just don't know exactly where it is. Make sure you know where everything is. I'd strongly recommend you have this all documented and ready before you go into the audit, so that the auditor is not waiting there to see if you know where that information is. It may be a bit tricky the first few times you do this, because it may be new, but have that cheat sheet in front of you to know exactly where to go. Remember, we want to ensure that documents are readily available and records are readily available as part of the audit, right? So you have to be able to demonstrate that, and that should be something that you know where everything is. Ensure that if you only keep hard copy records, that they are readily available to be scanned, or they are scanned ahead of time for easy access. We don't want to have to be sitting for a long time during the audits, and I mean everybody within the audit process, waiting for items to be uploaded to be reviewed to determine conformance. We want to ensure that everything is readily available to be reviewed to allow for an effective demonstration of conformance. Ensure that you work with your auditor ahead of time to schedule any interviews that need to be done. This even goes for both the on-site portion and the remote portion. You want to make sure that you are maximizing your time when you are doing these audits, and having those times allotted. Really important to talk to your auditor about getting those lined up and sticking to that schedule. So many of your audits, you should be receiving an audit plan. Make sure you reach out to the auditor after and set up those interviews with some of those key people that will need to be talked to. Ensure that you talk with your auditor and everybody can use that technology. Jess talked about ensuring that you are reviewing the use of the technologies ahead of time, that it is a requirement to be done. Ensure that you do this. Make sure that you do dry runs with your auditor, so that on the day that it occurs, the audit, that is the remote audit, that you don't have any hiccups and you're sitting there wondering why I can't hear this person, or I can't see your screen. Make sure that you test those things and everybody is ready to use those. And finally, and this is really a practical tip, I would strongly recommend that if you are going to take this option moving forward, that you conduct your internal audits using remote technologies. And I would try to ensure that you are using these remote technologies on hardware. Your computer system, whatnot, is not linked to the company, so that you can demonstrate the appropriate controls that are in place and that you can access those from outside of company issued documentation. So that is something that I would very much be looking at to move forward on that end.